a part of the Conservative Party. And Nicola Sturgeon, arrested and released. What does it all mean for Scottish separation? Is it a happy birthday for Sir Keir Starmer? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening to you. The top story tonight, Boris Johnson has formally stepped down this afternoon as an MP after accusing Rishi Sunak of talking rubbish in an escalating feud between the two politicians. It's after the Prime Minister claimed Mr Johnson had asked him to overrule checks for House of Lords honours nominations. Boris Johnson is blaming Downing Street for Conservative MPs and key allies failing to appear on the list despite being nominated by him. Nadine Dorries, Alok Sharma and Nigel Adams are among the MPs whose names are absent. Rishi Sunak says overruling the vetting committee wasn't something he was prepared to do.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises with people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
A man has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 21-year-old woman in Northern Ireland. Chloe Mitchell was last seen in the early hours of June the 3rd. A murder inquiry was launched after suspected human remains were found in Ballymena yesterday. 26-year-old Brandon John Rainey is accused of murder. A 34-year-old man has also been charged with assisting offenders and was due in court as well today. More than 600 people crossed the English Channel in small boats yesterday. That's the highest number on a single day so far this year. And it means the total number of people making the crossing so far this year has reached more than 8,500. At this point last year, the total had just passed 10,000. And finally, King Charles has been aboard the famous locomotive, the Flying Scotsman, today, celebrating 100 years of the steam engine. His Majesty's Royal Train was being pulled by the famous engine on the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, which was celebrating its 50th anniversary. The crew and driver invited the King to stand on the engine footplate as she pulled into the station platform, where well-wishers greeted them. The Flying Scotsman covered at least 2 million miles during its service on Britain's railway network and was retired in 1963. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. You're with GB News. Back now to Nigel.
Good evening. Last Monday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak went to Dover Harbour visiting Border Force on what was quite a windy day. This is what he had to say about government policy and its effect on small boats crossing the Channel.
Crossings elsewhere in Europe are up by almost a third over a similar time period, and yet crossings into the UK are down by a fifth. I think that should tell us something is going on here, and that's the result, I think, of the actions that we've put in place, and there's a range of different actions that we've put in place that are contributing to that.
Now, I thought this was complete and utter nonsense, and this is how I replied exactly a week ago today. Because from Sunday, the weather changes completely. It's the end of the big anticyclone in the North Sea. It's the end of the strong northeasterly breezes. If the forecast is anything like right, from this Sunday, we will have 8 to 10 days of absolutely, perfectly calm weather. We know there are many, many thousands, possibly even tens of thousands, from Dunkirk right the way down west of the Touquet to Burke, waiting to cross. Well, a week on, I thought I'd put that to the test. So very early this morning, we set out from Dover Harbour to find out who was right, the Prime Minister or me.
So the fog has lifted a bit. We still can't see very clearly, but there's Border Force picking up. There's a dinghy. Difficult to tell. There's a few dozen on board. Definitely, they're just being pulled up onto Border Force's boat now. The French escort over here to the left, as you can see, has now turned and is heading back towards France. This is going on at the moment. There's another pickup about to take place a little bit further down the channel. It's been foggy. There are 2 boats that have been spotted. I'd be surprised to be honest, if there aren't more. And remember, 11 boats came in yesterday. When we get conditions without that northeasterly wind, when we get relative calm, they're coming in just the same numbers they were last year. As for Rishi Sunak saying to us last week that he's cut it by 20% already and he's going to stop the boats, frankly, I think that is for the birds.
And you can hear, Nigel, the Border Force vessel out there still sounding its horn, because that fog has really only just lifted. It's been very dangerous here. You couldn't see more than a couple of 100 metres in front of our boat.
We're on this boat, we've got radar, we've got all the safety equipment for going through the shipping lanes in fog, something these boats do not have. And we've seen a couple of tragedies, and frankly, I'm amazed we haven't seen more.
Well, as predicted, Nigel, it has got much busier as the morning has progressed. We've just come across another Border Force vessel that's picked up not one but two dinghies full.
Yeah, two dinghies escorted, courtesy of the French Navy, over to our side of the channel. And yeah, Border Force picking them up. But more remarkably, and what I haven't seen before, is the other boat with the Border Force vessel, a big catamaran. And apparently 2 of these boats have been commissioned from Scotland at a price of 2 million quid, and their job, to pick up the empty dinghies. Yeah, 2 million quid a year to pick up the empty dinghies. Now, surely that job, if it has to be done, which it does, you don't want dinghies just floating off down the channel, surely that could have gone to local Kent people, but no, it's gone to a firm in Scotland.
Well, we can see one of those dinghies that has been cut loose by the Border Force catamaran at the moment as it waits for that other chartered catamaran to pick it up. And in fact, a shot of that shows 2 dinghies that it's already picked up, Nigel. But £2 million is a fairly decent contract. Absolutely. If you can get it.
I'm sure the local lads here could have done it for an awful lot less, and they know the waters well. But as you can see, it's a very foggy day, so it's been very difficult to spot some of these dinghies. But I mean, here we are. It's now 9:30 in the morning, and already we're on about, I'd say it's about 10 boats already, so we're headed for a very, very big day. Rishi, it's a barge full already today.
And our aerial footage showing shots of this Border Force vessel absolutely packed out, many dozens of migrants on the bow and again at the stern of the vessel. I guess if you speak to anyone that knows the marine environment around here, they could have told you that this was always due to the weather and not due to government policy.
Yeah. This is what I was so angry last week. The Prime Minister arrives in Dover and says, look at me, I'm wonderful. The numbers coming have been reduced significantly, and as we can see from the last 2 days, that is not the case. We've now got normal summer weather, and I would anticipate over the course of the next couple of months, I'd be surprised if we didn't see 10,000 in the next 2 months.
But I forgot something. Rishi did present last Monday a magical solution.
But what I am pleased is that we have now not just one barge arriving in a fortnight in Portland, but we've secured 2 further boats today, and then we will work through the detail and implementation of those.
So there we are, 2 barges. Well, that's going to do the trick, isn't it? Because nobody came on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday or Friday as predicted. On Saturday, 87 came. On Sunday, 616 came. Haven't got the figures for today yet. I would expect it to be in excess of 700. So already, just in 3 days, Mr. Sunak, we're a barge short. Oh, and by the way, Mayor Khan, you're going to have to accept a barge full down in the Royal Docks. So what was last Monday all about? Was it all about spin and presentation as opposed to substance? I was pretty angry last Monday with the way that he behaved. I want to ask you, do you trust Rishi? Let me know what you think. Farage@gbnews.com. I don't trust him an inch. He's the biggest spinner in British politics that we've seen since Tony Blair. Well, joining me is Danny Shaw, former BBC Home Affairs correspondent. Danny, the problems of illegal immigration have been going on for a very, very long time. We seemed years ago to be rather more effective at dealing with it.
Well, I think what we didn't have many years ago was the visibility of it. People coming in across the channel on small boats, coming ashore. The very fact that our borders so visibly were being breached in this way. We didn't have that. We had people on container lorries largely hidden from view. There were terrible tragedies, obviously, about that. And also, you had a better functioning asylum system for many years. So you did have claims resolved more quickly, and you did have people deported and removed more quickly. The problem at the moment you have is you've got 170,000 odd asylum applications that are still in the queue, have not been resolved. I think the total number of people who've come across small boats and have claimed asylum since 2018, who've had their claims removed, dealt with, is about 20%.
Yeah.
So 80% of asylum claims since 2018, small boats arrivals, have not been dealt with. So anyone who's wanting to come across will look at that and say, well, I come here, whether my claim is valid or not, I can stay for a bit.
Or you just disappear, as an increasing number of people are from these hotels, quite, much higher levels of people absconding. But Danny, how is it that, and even though, we used to call the Home Office not fit for purpose more than a decade ago, it's even less fit, it would seem now. But how is it we were able to remove people more easily a few years ago than we are now?
I think it's partly because the system was functioning better. I think it's partly because we had some agreements with some of our European neighbours, because we were in the EU. I mean, the way to solve this for me is to have sort of a boat ready to go back in the other direction as soon as people arrive. So you come here illegally, you go back in a boat, you go back to France immediately. And that requires an agreement with the French. And the French will say, well, what's in it for us? Well, what's in it for them is the fact that that would stop people crossing the channel, so that would reduce the number of guards they'd have to have on security. But the British would have to give them something. And that would be at some kind of processing centre in France where claims would be determined then. And if you were one of the people whose claim was rejected then, you came across, you'd be removed immediately. There would be a quota of people that we would take, and above that, we just wouldn't take any more.
It's a very odd position, isn't it? A further 500 million promised to the French. And yes, they have been slashing more boats, and they've been building up at Gravelines some quite big fencing. But the point I've made on this show many, many times is these boats are now launching off a 70-mile width of coast. And yet, as we left the Channel this morning, there were 4 big French naval vessels escorting dinghies through the quite foggy conditions at times, almost from the French shore to the middle of the Channel and handing over to Border Force. So I think, the French would be better off. Their navy would be far less busy. They could pocket the money we'd promised them already. But in the absence of an agreement, just remember this. Tony Abbott, who was the Aussie PM back in 2012, had no international agreements, and yet he just towed the boats back to Indonesia. There was hell to pay. The United Nations, the EU, the British government all condemned him. But once he towed half a dozen back, they stopped coming. What if we just took them back to France without an agreement?
Well, that's just not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen under this government, and I don't think it's practical, Nigel. I don't think it's feasible. I don't think we're Australia. We can't do that.
Why not?
We need an agreement in place. You can't just take people back like that. You need an agreement, but that requires hard work. It requires ministers to shuttle backwards and forwards to offer various things, and that takes many, many weeks and many months to do that. It is possible to do that, but it requires real will. And in the meantime, obviously the boats will come and the government hates the headlines. By the way, I think you're right that the reduction this year is probably mainly due to weather conditions, but I think it's also because there are fewer Albanians coming. There are far fewer Albanians coming. There was 12,000, I think, last year, something like that. The numbers are much smaller now, and that probably has...
But Danny, that's interesting, you see, because there was no valid claim for people coming from Albania. The
vast majority.
Germany was zero. Zero.
Yeah.
We seem to grant 50% asylum for reasons that are quite beyond me, for a country that's a holiday destination, a democracy. But we did deport about 1,800 young men back to Albania. So you see, that's the reason fewer Albanians are coming, I think. They're being replaced by people coming from the subcontinent, from the Punjab. But, OK, I think we should be like Australia. You don't. Barring that, Rwanda. A Rwanda plan, the government's plan, passed, and yet various legal challenges, both in this country and potentially, of course, and we saw an interjection already from the European Court of Human Rights. Isn't part of the problem here we're in a terrible legal muddle?
Well, we're awaiting the result of the appeal, so the courts are going to rule on that. They've given the green light so far. It's likely to go all the way to the UK Supreme Court. So we'll have to see how that pans out and whether the government can get flights off in the meantime. I personally don't like the Rwanda deal. I don't like it at all. From a moral standpoint, I think it's wrong. It feels like we're not dealing with the problem, so we're exporting it to a country that, you know, is happy to receive, you know, a huge amount of money from us to deal with it.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I think it's an abdication of our responsibilities. What we should be doing is reaching an agreement with our EU counterparts, and that requires hard work. It may not be popular, but that's the only way around it.
And it may not be possible.
Well, we have to try it.
I mean, if they want to be bloody-minded, and, you know, they in the past have been quite often.
But you know, we can try it. I mean, David Blunkett got an agreement with them, didn't he? About
he did, the
controls.
Sangatte Agreement.
Yeah.
He got the Sangatte
Agreement
20 years ago.
Juxtaposed controls, you know, it is possible to do that. You know, people didn't think that we would get some sort of agreement with the EU to fix the problems in Northern Ireland. That was possible through hard work and negotiation, endless meetings and all the rest of it. It is doable.
Well, I think the Americans played a bit of a role in Northern Ireland too. And a final thought, Danny, on all of this, perhaps a slightly more political question, so maybe unfair. But when Sunak just stands in front of us last Monday saying, I've brought these policies into place, you know, it's down, we're winning, and I get the Albania point. But actually, there's no end in sight, is there?
There's no immediate end in sight. You have to remind yourself that the numbers, although a bit lower than last year, are still well above the figure that in 2021 and 2020. I don't see that there's any end in sight to illegal migration, because even if they clamp down substantially on people coming across on small boats, these criminal gangs will find other means. Perhaps they'll start to use container lorries and so on again.
Yeah, and people will pay them. The going rate's about $3,500 to get across, and all the while they think they can get here and stay, they'll keep paying the $3,500. Danny Shaw, thank you for joining me. Well, Danny there, you know, outlining the reasonable way to deal with this. I have to say, I have a sort of feeling maybe it's time to become a bit more unreasonable. In a moment, Boris Johnson's dramatic resignation. And what does it mean for his future in the Conservative Party?
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, I asked you, do you trust Rishi? I've got to say the reactions are pretty strong. Dave says no, he's a bigger liar than Boris Johnson. He just thinks because he looks tidier that he can get away with it. Laurie says, more than I trust Boris Johnson. However, that is a very low bar to begin with. Another says, no, never trust a backstabbing traitor. I resigned my membership the day he became PM. And Lee says, Rishi Sunak is an unelected Prime Minister. I do not trust him at all. We need a general election. Now, since that's a rather sort of Daily Mirror line, that one. Since I was last on air with you on Thursday, rather a lot has happened. The Privilege is Committee obviously were finding against Boris Johnson. He decided not to put himself through the humiliation of a suspension from the Commons, a vote and possibly, or probably, a recall by-election in Uxbridge. And off he went, to be followed by, of course, Nadine Dorries and Nigel Adams. 3 by-elections now coming up for the Conservative Party. But also, of course, it was the whole question of honours, when names on Boris Johnson's resignation honours list were declined. Some of them politicians, others businessmen who appear to me to be quite blameless. But the war of words between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson has really intensified today. Here was Sunak speaking about the honours list this morning.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises to people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
Just think about that. He said he didn't think it was right. He's basically saying that what Boris Johnson was putting forward was dishonest. That's the dig that Sunak is getting in, and Boris Johnson has responded. He's responded by saying that the Prime Minister is talking rubbish. So we have a Conservative Party not just split, but possibly with some kind of civil war. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Sir Jake Berry, former chairman of the Conservative Party, and, of course, chairman of the Northern Research Group. Jake.
Come on, Nigel, I get all the good kicks. How can you respond to an introduction?
No, you're very brave for being here. Let's think about this. Johnson he's lost huge popularity in the country. He's more popular than Prince Andrew, but he has got a big negative rating, despite the great success of 2019. And he's now in a very minority position within your own party. I mean, Rishi and the establishment have won, haven't they?
I mean, undoubtedly, yes, they have. I mean, Boris, let's make no bones about it. He is an alpha politician of our generation in the way that many people are, including you, I might add. But, he is an alpha politician of our generation. He resigned. Clearly, we haven't seen what this committee's even said yet, but clearly it's going to be pretty critical with a significant suspension. Otherwise, I guess he wouldn't have done it. I'm not quite sure, actually, whether he's resigned because that was coming down the line or whether he just really doesn't have faith in the sort of the system that has been set up by him to investigate this and whether he feels for some reason it's not quite acted in a way that he thinks is right. But I actually think one of the real tragedies is, of course, that platform that he had, and I think he used so well, to fight for the North of England, as you say, former chairman of the Northern Research Group, to fight for the North of England.
And the North is crucial, isn't it?
He's lost that by resigning. I think that's a great pity. I think he's a loss to Parliament. And, you know, political popularities go up and down. And my own personal view is that if he was still Prime Minister, he would have recovered. But he's not.
But he's not. And the Conservative Party is across a whole range of issues. I mean, partly when he was there, but certainly under Sunak, it now looks like a globalist party. There is no prospect of diverging from EU rules. A deal on Northern Ireland has been done, which permanently cuts Northern Ireland off, or certainly for the foreseeable future, from the rest of the country. We've got Hunt in the Treasury. We've got the highest tax burden for 71 years. We've got big state. You know, and Boris Johnson said very clearly in that resignation letter that Sunak was taking it in a direction that wasn't conservative. Now, you've coined a phrase, a word for all of this. Blobonomics. Explain blobonomics to us.
Well, it's sort of... I mean, if the Conservative Party wants to get back to winning ways, we have to cut tax. It's just really is that simple. Tax is far too high. I knocked on a pensioner's door in Darwin last Thursday when I was doing my weekly street surgery, and he came to the door and said, "I'll never vote for you again. I have a £20 a year private pension," and you started taking tax away from it. And blobonomics, I think, is a sort of... it's a sort of bizarre fiscal idea by the Treasury that actually you know, the way you sort of grow the economy is cutting tax, but increasing tax. So, of course, on the one hand, they say to us, you know, you're far too fat, so we're going to put tax on sugar. You smoke too much, we're going to put tax on tobacco, and you all like a bit of a drink, we're going to put tax on alcohol. They accept, and by the way, they're right, that when you increase tax on things, it discourages people from doing it. But you can't then say that putting up corporation tax or increasing personal tax is going to grow the economy.
Because you discourage entrepreneurs.
But those two things can't be right. And that is blobonomics. It is basically a broken political ideology that is, you know, pushed by London and the centre. And we feel it in the north of England. For years we haven't had the investment we wanted. It's a broken political ideology. And if we want to win the next election, we have to break it down. We need to blow up blobonomics and get back to levelling up.
The trouble is, the blobonomics types are now in total control of the Conservative Party. The Eurosceptics, the people like you that believe in free enterprise very, very strongly, you're now marginalised. I mean, can we expect a by-election in Rosendale and Darwin?
No, absolutely not. I have been reselected by my brilliant local association. I will be fighting that election as a Conservative because I am fighting for what I believe in. I believe in the north of England, which is why I served as Northern Powerhouse Minister and actually designed the levelling up policy for Boris. Yeah, I believe in low tax, I believe in free enterprise, and I'm going to keep fighting for that. And I think, look, what the Conservative Party is really good at, we've shown over decades, is working out how to win. We're now at a point we've got 3 by-elections. If we want to get ahead in those by-elections, we've got to stop talking about being the party of low tax and start being the government of low tax.
Come on. There's a civil war going on between this giant figure of Boris Johnson and a Prime Minister with considerable support within the party, if not in the country. And the party, in the end, isn't big enough for both of them, is it?
And one of them's gone. And the thing about Friday... the thing about Friday, maybe gone for now, who knows, as he says, but the thing about Friday is you did have 3 people who could potentially be the Prime Minister of this country. It's now down to 2. It's Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer, to give him his full title. And as Conservatives and as the Conservative MP, I am going to fight my guts out to make sure that the person who walks up down the street is number 10.
Boris Johnson, a man that you've supported so strongly, has, without a fight, virtually gifted the Uxbridge constituency to the Labour Party. He's now seen by some in the Conservative Party to have committed a sort of act of treachery, a mutiny. He's encouraged 2 others to do the same thing. There are calls within your party for him never to be allowed to stay again. He's going to be driven out of that party completely, isn't he?
Well, after all, I mean, I think that would be a terrible mistake for the party. And I was asked earlier today whether I thought he should be able to stand. I mean, the idea that the Conservative Party would block the most successful Conservative Prime Minister we have seen since Margaret Thatcher standing at election is for the birds. It's certainly not something I would support. It's not something I would support.
You saw how Rishi Sunak put the knife in on the stage this morning, the words that he used. I mean, that's vicious stuff.
But we've got to move beyond it. We've got these 3 by-elections. They are a big test for the Prime Minister. I believe in this bold Conservative vision, attack and change the status quo. And look, if you effectively say the only thing you're going to achieve as a government is stabilise things, well, that's OK. unless things are bloody terrible to start with. You know, you could...
Stability of failure.
Teachers are on strike.
I know.
Trains don't work. So we've got to move beyond that. We've got to sell that positive vision.
Jake,
Rishi is the man to do it.
I don't think that Boris has a future inside politics. His one big legacy of Brexit may well be under threat halfway through the next Labour government. I believe he may have to work outside the Conservative Party, but I could be wrong about that. It's just my feeling. But let me ask you. I just asked our audience, you know, and I saw Rishi Sunak in Dover last week talking total and utter tosh. And knowing he was talking to... I may use that now. And I went today to prove that it's absolute nonsense. Do you trust Rishi?
Yeah, I do. I trust him to
you don't
do
really,
the...
do you?
No, I do. Come on, don't put words in my mouth. I trust him to put the hard work in. But, you know, this is a big test for him. And, you know, I would call, and there are lots of colleagues calling who support him. They want the Conservative Party to succeed. We want him to succeed as our Prime Minister, to come out with some bold Conservative policies, be a Conservative government that cuts taxes, gets hold of immigration.
He's not going to do any of that, and you jolly well know that. And I'm sick to death of hearing this cut immigration. I've heard it since 2010 at every election. It's now at record levels, both legally and illegally. I mean, why should people vote for this failing Conservative Party?
Well, because we need to persuade them that our bold vision for Britain, which, if you live in the north of England, you can already say that through levelling up, and I know it's a pejorative term, or Northern Powers, or whatever you want to call it, your lives are changing. Go to Rosendale and Darwin, see the skylines change. Go to Darlington, go anywhere in the north of England. We need to say to people, look, we have done that. Unfortunately, elections, you often don't get credit for what you've done, but we have done a lot. But what we need to do is capture their hearts and minds with what we will do for them next. And I'm sorry, you know, maintenance of status quo isn't going to do that. We as a Conservative Party need to go beyond it.
Well...
And, you know, that is the key to success.
Sir Jake Barry, it's perfectly clear what you believe. You are what I would label as a Conservative in a party that is increasingly not particularly Conservative. But thank you for joining us this evening. In a moment, we'll talk about the indictment facing President Trump in a Florida courtroom tomorrow.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Well, a couple of What the Farage moments. The first, of course, is that amazing Serbian athlete, Novak Djokovic. Some of you who've been watching this show for some time will remember I actually went down to Belgrade when he was put under house arrest in Australia. So big a supporter of him am I. And, of course, he wouldn't have the jab. So he missed out on several tournaments, but he has triumphed in the French Open. He's 36 years old, pushing 37. He's an incredible athlete, and that was his 23rd major tennis title. And that now makes him the highest male winner of tennis titles in the history of the sport. And with Wimbledon coming up in just a few weeks' time, who would bet against him? I think if he hadn't missed so many of those tournaments through being banned, through not taking the vaccine, goodness knows what number he would be on. But he is a supreme, absolutely supreme athlete. When I first went to the European Parliament in 1999, one of the people I saw there was one Silvio Berlusconi. Yes, he'd been Prime Minister of Italy. That was over, so he'd come to spend some time in the European Parliament. After that, he went back, of course, as Prime Minister, but strangely, in my last 6-7 months in the European Parliament, Berlusconi was back in the European Parliament. So he's someone that I met quite a few times over the years. Now, of course, a highly controversial, some would say totally outrageous figure, but he was the longest-serving Prime Minister since World War II in Italy. And strangely, he almost brought Italy some sort of kind of stability. That may sound mad, but Italian politics is pretty crazy. And he could be actually pretty entertaining. And I have to tell you, at no point did I ever attend one of Silvio Berlusconi's bunga parties. For one very simple reason, he never invited me. Now, events in America have been equally, if not even more, dramatic than what we've seen here in this country, in Westminster, and indeed, of course, in Scotland, which we'll come to in a moment. President Trump is now facing an indictment in a Florida courtroom tomorrow. There are a total of 37 charges. Most of them come under the Espionage Act, which I find totally extraordinary. I don't think you could ever meet anybody, whatever his faults, whatever you think of him, you couldn't meet anybody more patriotic than Donald Trump. But he faces a huge prison sentence if found guilty. Well, Congressman Andy Ogles, who is from Nashville and is a member of the House Freedom Caucus, he's from Tennessee, he comes from the 5th Congressional District, and he joins me down the line now. Andy, I know you've got a bit of a plan to push back against Biden, but just to begin, this is the first time that a former American president has ever faced anything like this. And I know that with Hillary Clinton, there was the laptop and a whole load of confidential information that went missing. There were seriously important documents found in President Biden's home. What is it about Trump's so-called crimes that are different to those two?
Well, no, you make some great points, and thank you for having me. This is clearly political persecution. I mean, a president has never faced this type of indictment. And really, when you look at, Tom Fenton's Judicial Watch, he's done a brief on this indictment. It really doesn't hold up to what you would consider judicial muster. So it should be thrown out on its merits. I do think that they'll press to have it go to court. We'll see. Time will tell. But at the end of the day, this is a persecution of a president that the Democratic Party, the left, is terrified of. He is going to win the Republican primary. And quite frankly, I predict that he'll be the next president of the United States. And this is why they're trying so aggressively to stop him. Never mind the fact that the Biden family, we've now uncovered the bank account where they were accepting money payments from foreign countries. Never mind the fact that when Biden was vice president, He threatened to hold up $1 billion in foreign aid in order to get someone fired from office. I mean, you have a long history of corruption within the Biden family. You know, I would argue it's a criminal enterprise, but nothing's happening to the Bidens. Nothing's happening to Clintons. And I'll be honest with you, I would be appalled if the Republicans were doing this to any Democratic president if it didn't have some sort of criminal merit to it. This case is nothing more than political persecution, and all those involved should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, it could be, though. It could be. Is it possible, Andy, that he has made some mistakes? Is it possible that he has taken some documents that should not have been at his private residences?
Well, as you said earlier, you know, they found documents in Biden's garage, an unsecured garage. They found documents with Mike Pence, a good man who would have never intended, quite frankly, to break the law. And so this idea that the president, who had some documents in a secured facility, by the way, there's cameras, there's security, there's Secret Service on this premises. I mean, it's quite frankly a lockdown environment. This again rises to not criminal, but persecution by a woke Justice Department. And look, I think this is a scary moment in American history that you have retribution being paid to a former elected official.
It's
Folks,
clearly,
this never worked in Rome. It didn't work in Britain. It's not going to work in America.
It's pretty vicious. As I'm talking to you, Andy Ogles, we're showing some pictures of Florida, some of his fans out on the street awaiting his arrival. And you're going to have a go yourself, Andy, at launching impeachment articles against President Biden.
Well, absolutely. So on merit, I've introduced just a few moments ago articles of impeachment against Biden and Vice President Harris. In both cases, they're for good reason and should be adjudicated as such. This is not political retribution. But that being said, we are sending a message. I am sending a message that, look, if you're going to go after someone who's in office, you better be sure that the grounds, the case, the basis, the merit of your argument is sound and not a bunch of documents that were in, boxes in a secured facility, right?
Andy Ogles, thanks for joining me. The divisions in American politics as big as they have ever been. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, over the weekend, Man City did the treble. Quite extraordinary. Not been done for a very, very long time. Only ever been done once before by a British club, and indeed, that was Manchester United. We can cross live now to see pictures of fans out in the streets in Manchester celebrating. It has been absolutely lashing with rain. It's still raining. It's not quite as bad as it was. But I guess if you come from Manchester, you are pretty used to it raining heavily. But hey, that doesn't dampen spirits at all. And an absolutely amazing, phenomenal season for Man City. Congratulations to them. Well, we'd seen it happen with her husband. We'd seen it happen with the party treasurer. All sorts of talk about over £600,000 that was given to help fund a second referendum, that referendum that never happened. And of course, there was the camper van that turned up as well. Lots of questions. And finally, Nicola Sturgeon herself was arrested, held, questioned for 7 hours, but has not been charged. What does this mean for the SNP? What does it mean for Sturgeon's legacy? And is this perhaps a happy birthday for Sir Keir Starmer? In a moment, I'll be joined by Neil Hanvey MP. He represents the Alba Party in Westminster.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, it's been the most meteoric rise. The SNP, a party that's been round for the best part of 100 years, and for much of that time had one or two MPs in Parliament, suddenly surged. And it surged with the decline of the Labour vote and, of course, Alex Salmond, a very charismatic leader. But under Nicola Sturgeon's leadership, and she became leader after the 2014 referendum on separation went against them, and then Nicola Sturgeon took over, and almost unbelievably, in the 2015 general election, they won nearly all of the seats in Scotland and indeed have dominated the Scottish Parliament ever since. As a politician, for some she was seen as one of the most successful leaders in the world, and she was held up by others as being this great example of strong female leaders. I have to say, as someone that has met many, many political and world leaders over the years, on a personal level, I found her one of the most unpleasant people I've ever come across in politics. I never liked her. I shared a stage with her on many, many occasions, but never enjoyed meeting her off stage. But I think in the end, what this story is all about is hubris. Yes, when someone's position appears to be completely and utterly unassailable, they become arrogant, they become complacent. And it doesn't just apply to leaders, it applies to many around them. We obviously can't comment on the £600,000 and what it all means. What we can comment on is her absolute belief that she wanted to make Scotland the most progressive country in the world, and that led to the Isla Bryson case. You remember that? A double rapist goes to court wearing a wig, says he is now a she, gets convicted of those awful rapes, and then sent to a women's prison. Scotland says no, and she was gone. Her legacy is obviously going to be tarnished in some way by all of this. Her prospects of going on to a big international role, I would have thought, are very, very limited indeed. We are approaching something like nemesis, I think, for the reputation of Nicola Sturgeon. And if you believe the polls, well, there'll still be a nationalist vote in Scotland, of course there will. But truth of it is, what will happen is Labour may gain up to 20 seats. And all of this makes a very, very big difference with the electoral arithmetic and calculations at the next general election. I mean, this really is an absolute boon for Sir Keir Starmer. And I think for the Union, And I know amongst my English friends there's some very mixed opinions. Some say, no, the union really matters. It's been a huge success over the course of the last 3 centuries. Others say, oh, the hell, let the Scots go. We could perhaps cut 4p off the pound in income tax. I think one thing for certain, that the prospect of Scotland breaking away from the United Kingdom is not even going to be on the agenda for the foreseeable future. And I certainly don't see us having a second referendum any time soon. I'm afraid Neil Hanvey MP has not managed to join me down the line from Westminster, but I've given my best interpretation of it. I'm joined by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, you know, there's so many things we could talk about, but I just wonder, how much trouble is Brexit in?
I think Brexit is fine because constitutionally it's almost impossible for us to go back. Can you imagine the other side campaigning? Because there'd have to be a referendum to join the single currency and to join Schengen.
But would there have to be a referendum? See, this is the thing that worries me. I mean, I'm looking at the Conservatives in the midst of a civil war, and you know, and this battle of these two men, which has turned pretty bitter and pretty nasty today. I thought Sunak's comments were, whew, boy, they were really very, very sharp. And things can change. Of course, things can change, and we know that. But if we face, you know, a big Labour majority, and you were the man, you were the minister who put in place the legislation to get rid of thousands of EU laws, wasn't one of your hopes that it made going back into the single market very difficult?
That's absolutely right. And every law that is repealed makes it harder. But that bill, which is almost through, we had some Lord's amendments earlier on today, still removes EU supremacy of law, and it removes EU legal principles. So we are back to the common law with passing that. To change again to the Napoleonic Code, I think, would be pretty difficult. And I think, you say, would there have to be a referendum? No, of course, constitutionally there wouldn't. But in political reality, bear in mind, Blair wanted to take us into the euro. But the referendum commitment stopped him.
Yeah.
And I think the idea that you could take the UK back into Europe, which would now involve the euro and open borders, is just for the birds.
I think I agree with that, but I think Brino becomes a very, very realistic prospect, where we're effectively, we are, and we haven't broken away from single market rules, sadly, but where effectively a Labour government aligns us to all new EU legislation.
Absolutely, but then you're one general election away from real Brexit. And that's always the possibility. And you and I knew this. When we campaigned for Brexit, we knew that that freed up the voters to vote if they wanted to for a Corbynite party.
Of course.
I remember my father in the 1970s was very pro-European. And the reason he was pro-Europe was in the hope that it would stop Tony Benn. And we thought in 2016 that it was better to take the risk of a modern Tony Benn.
We did. We just never imagined, Jacob, that a Conservative government with an 80-seat majority would not diverge and would not get back control of the borders. And that makes it kind of easier for Starmer. I'm with you. I don't think they would automatically overturn EU membership without a referendum. It'd be a mad thing to do. But I do worry very much about Brino. Now, I'm going to be coming on with you after the top of the hour.
Indeed.
And we're going to talk about Boris Johnson's future in politics.
We're going to find out whether you're setting up a new party with him.
Well, absolutely, we must talk about that.
That's the world exclusive.
It's and I've been back in my channel today, and Mr. Sunak needs to eat his words, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think, I mean,
I asked an audience question, Jacob.
Yes.
You know, do you trust Rishi? Let me ask you, do you trust Rishi?
Of course I trust the leader of the
Conservative
Party.
You see, they come out with all this. It's absolute baloney. We had Sir Jake Berry on earlier. We've got Jacob. I'm not sure whether he crossed his fingers when he gave me that answer, but he might just as well have done. Right, let us finish the programme by going back to Manchester. Better than that, Donald Trump has just landed in Florida. Well, there is Trump arriving. He's arriving in Miami. He, of course, is facing this enormous challenge tomorrow. If he was found guilty of all the charges, it would be about 100 years in prison. Whether he made mistakes, clerical mistakes, effectively, I don't know. But they may be fairly similar to those that were made by Hillary Clinton and indeed made by Biden. But it's going to be one hell of a test. So far, all the charges and the findings against him have actually made him even more popular within the Republican Party and in the country. We'll have to find out in time whether there is a straw that breaks the camel's back or whether this just makes him stronger, because Americans say they just can't trust an over-politicised judiciary. Well, the good news is that the weather has improved markedly. That's why the boats are coming. Let's have a look and see what tomorrow is bringing.
Evening, a hot start to the week. It is going to stay fine and sunny for most places, but temperatures just dropping off a touch as we go through this week, and there is still the likelihood of further thunderstorms on Tuesday. We've seen some downpours today and still one or two thunderstorms rumbling on at the moment, but they are going to fade as we go through this evening, and most places becoming dry under the influence of high pressure. But as I said, still a few storms around at the moment. They'll tend to fade in most locations. We could just keep one or two going and pushing northwards through the night. But for most, it's going to be a dry night with lengthy clear spells. A little cooler than last night in the east, but for most it'll be, again, really quite warm, quite humid, a tricky night for sleeping. On to the details for Tuesday. Vast majority dry and sunny sums it up, but we are likely to start with a few scattered showers and quite misty conditions around some coasts. That mist and low cloud may stick in Shetland, and again through the afternoon the potential for further thunderstorms to break out, mostly over western parts of Scotland and the western side of Northern Ireland. Again, they could be torrential and they may cause some disruption, so we do have a Met Office warning in place, but most places won't see those showers tomorrow. Generally it's going to be a sunny one, a warmer day in the southwest. Temperatures, again, generally mid to high 20s, although it will be cooler on the coast, and we might get up to 30 degrees in one or two locations. Again, it's dry, fine, and pretty clear through Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Still, the potential for one or two showers across the far northwest, and mist and har could just return back to the coast of eastern Scotland. That could stick around into Wednesday, but again, for most places, Wednesday is looking dry and sunny, and the risk of showers in the northwest really dropping away. Temperatures just dropping away a touch as well, but it's still going to feel very warm and humid with temperatures in the low to mid-20s. Goodbye.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation.